Hey, Roger Martin here for Billings, Montana. Good day. Barr says something very interesting in this NBC News exclusive. This is done on the 10th.
Could affect the outcome of the election. As far as I'm aware, this is the first time in history that this has been done to a presidential campaign, the use of these counterintelligence techniques against a presidential campaign. And we have to remember that in today's world, presidential campaigns are frequently in contact with foreign persons. And indeed, in most campaigns, there are signs of illegal foreign money coming in. And we don't automatically assume that the campaigns are nefarious. And
Now, most important is that this is the first time that the judicial and the spying apparatus, the surveillance apparatus of a past president was used against an incumbent president. So this is very serious. Now, Barr says something else too. He thought this was very flimsy for evidence to do impeachment.
Traitors and acting in league with foreign powers. There has to be some basis before we use these very potent powers in our core First Amendment activity. And here, I felt this was very flimsy. Basically, I think the department has a rule of reason, which is at the end of the day, is what you're relying on sufficiently powerful to justify the techniques you're using? And the question there is, how strong is the evidence? How sensitive is the activity you're looking at? And what are the alternatives? And I think when you step back here and say, what was this all based on? It's not sufficient. Remember, there was and never has been any evidence of collusion, and yet this campaign and the president's administration has been dominated by this investigation into what turns out to be completely baseless.
Well, of course, it doesn't turn out that way at the beginning. At the start.
So let's look at
Sure.
look at what the basis of it was. So in May 2016. Apparently a 28-year-old campaign volunteer says in a social setting.
This is George Papadopoulos.
This is George Papadopoulos. And this was described by the foreign official who heard him, as who couldn't remember exactly what was said, but it was characterized as a suggestion of a suggestion. He suggested that there had been a suggestion from the Russians that they had some adverse information to Hillary, which they might dump in the campaign. Well, what was going on in May? You may recall that we were in the thick of the investigation of Hillary Clinton's secret server. And the media was full of stories, and the blogosphere was full of stories, and political circles in Washington were full of stories and speculation that the Russians had in 2014, 2 years before, hacked into her secret server and were therefore in a position to drop this stuff during the election. In fact, the day before this comment was made in a bar, Fox News was reporting that their sources told them there was a debate going on in the Russian government as to whether or not to drop the Hillary Clinton's emails between the intelligence agency and the foreign ministry. But that related to Hillary's server. So the FBI, what the FBI did is later, after the DNC hack and the dumping through Wikipedia in July. WikiLeaks. In July, they get this information that this somewhat vague statement was made in a bar. And they jumped right into a full-scale investigation before they even went and talked to the foreign officials about exactly what was said. They opened an investigation of the campaign, and they used very intrusive techniques. They didn't do, I think, what would normally be done under those circumstances, which is to go to the campaign And there certainly were people in the campaign that could be trusted, including a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee and the governor of New Jersey, a former U.S. attorney. There were people to talk to. And what I find particularly inexplicable is that they talked to the Russians, but not to the presidential campaign. On August 4th, Brennan braced the head of Russian intelligence. He calls the head of Russian intelligence and says, "We know what you're up to, you better stop it." He did it again later in August, and then President Obama talked to President Putin in September and said, "We know what you're up to, you better cut it out."
Now that seems really strange to me. Brennan and Obama both doing this. Very strange.
So they go and confront the Russians, who clearly are the bad guys, and they won't go and talk to the campaigns and say, what is this about?
So the Inspector General says he found no evidence to indicate that the FBI's decision to start this investigation was based on political bias. Do you agree?
Well, I think you have to understand what the IG's methodology is, and I think it's the appropriate methodology for an Inspector General. He starts with limited information. He can only talk to people who are essentially there as employees, and he's limited to the information generally in the FBI. But his approach is to say, if I get an explanation from the people I'm investigating that is not unreasonable on its face, then I will accept it as long as there's not contradictory testimonial or documentary evidence. In other words, it's a very deferential standard. And all he said is, people gave me an explanation and I didn't find anything to contradict it, so I don't have a basis for saying that there was improper motive. But he hasn't decided the issue of improper motive.
Have you?
No. I think we have to wait until the investigation, the full investigation is done, and that's the fundamental distinction between what Durham is doing and what the IG is doing. Durham is not limited to the FBI. He can talk to other agencies. He can compel people to testify. One of the problems in the IG's investigation, I think he would agree, is that Comey refused to sign back up for his security clearance and therefore couldn't be questioned about classified matters. So,
wow, there's a big bombshell. Comey did not sign back up for his papers and his security clearance, and so he couldn't be questioned. Now that was deliberate in my mind. He knew that he could be questioned if he didn't get those security clearances, which is really pathetic.
someone like Durham can compel testimony. He can talk to a whole range of people, private parties, foreign governments, and so forth. And I think that is the point at which a decision has to be made about motivations. And I think right now it would be premature to make any judgment one way or the other.
I just wonder, though, about what the FBI would say, I think, here is, okay, so they opened an investigation. Nobody was ever charged. They were concerned about possible Russian meddling in the election. Why not open this investigation? What's the harm? You've said intrusive means. So what is your concern about the fact that they did this?
Well, I think the big picture is this. From day one, remember, they say, okay, we're not going to go to talk to the campaign. We're going to put people in there, wire them up, and have these conversations with people involved in the campaign, because that way we'll get the truth. From the very first day of this investigation, which was July 31st, 2016, all the way to its end in September 2017, there was not one incriminatory bit of evidence to come in. It was all exculpatory. The people that they were taping denied any involvement with Russia, denied the very specific facts that the FBI was relying on. So what happens? The FBI ignores it, presses ahead, withholds that information from the court, withholds critical exculpatory information from the court while it gets a electronic surveillance warrant. It also withholds from the court
So this evidence that they keep withholding from the court to get these warrants, FISA warrants, is wrong. It's criminal in my mind.
clear-cut evidence that the dossier that they ultimately relied on to get the FISA warrant was a complete sham. They hid information about the lack of reliability even when they went the first time for the warrant. But in January, after the election, the entire case collapsed when the principal source says, I never told Steele this stuff. And this was all speculation. No, and I have zero information to support this stuff. At that point, when their entire case collapsed, what did they do? They kept on investigating the president and well into his administration after the case collapsed. But here, to me, is the damning thing. They not only didn't tell the court that what they had been relying on was completely rubbish. They actually started putting in things to bolster the Steele report by saying, well, we talked to the sources and they appeared to be truthful. But they don't inform the court that what they're truthful about is that the dossier is false. So that's hard to explain. And the core statement, in my opinion, by the IG is that these irregularities, these misstatements, these omissions were not satisfactorily explained. And I think that leaves open the possibility to
Not satisfactorily explained. Boy, open criminality on this, because it's perjury. It's perjury. It's false statements that they got subpoenas on.
For bad faith. I think it's premature now to reach a judgment on that, but I think that further work has to be done, and that's what Durham is doing.
This, of course, is where the Inspector General is most critical of the FBI. And when you say bad faith, are you saying a bias? Because there can be all sorts of bias. There could be political bias, confirmation bias. What do you think happened?
Well, I think there are a number of scenarios, but I don't want to, get into them. I think there could have been a lot of motivations involved, and different motivations. And there could have been motivations in the FBI and motivations outside the FBI by other players in this. This thing focuses on the FBI. There was a lot going on around this that is not the subject matter of Horowitz's report, but I think has a direct bearing, perhaps, on what was going on in the FBI.
A lot of things going around. I'll have to edit a spot here, but he says something very important. Barr says that there are a lot of things going on around this FISA report that have bearing on it. And Durham is going to get into these things.
Get into them. I think there could have been a lot of motivations involved, and different motivations. And there could have been motivations in the FBI and motivations outside the FBI by other players in this. This thing focuses on the FBI. There was a lot going on around this that is not the subject matter of Horowitz's report. But
see, that's the problem. There's a lot of stuff going on around this that is not the subject of Horowitz's report. That's unfortunate. But Durham will get into these things, and that's why they've elected him to do so. And he has the full power and authority to do so.
I think has a direct bearing, perhaps, on what was going on in the FBI.
Based on what you know so far, do you still stand by your statement that the campaign was spied upon?
Well, it's clearly spied upon. I mean, that's what electronic surveillance is. I think wiring people.
See, this is the idiocy of the news reporting. Barr just said they were clearly spied upon. The surveillance was clearly spying. And idiot reporter. This is why the media sucks. They have no frickin' brains. They have an agenda. They have no frickin' brains as far as openness and intelligence, mental intelligence. It sucks.
People up to go in and talk to people and make recordings of their conversations is spying. I think going through people's emails, which they did as a result of the FISA warrant, they went through everything, from Page's life.
Because he wasn't in the campaign at the point where they began the surveillance.
Yes, but his emails go back. I mean, the main reason they were going for the FISA warrant initially was to go back historically and seize all his emails and texts and all that stuff from back months and even years. So they were covering the period that he was in the campaign, and that's exactly the reason they went for the FISA, to get that stuff.
So what do you think, what questions will John Durham address that the IG didn't?
Well, Durham is looking at the whole waterfront. He is looking at the issue of how it got started. He's looking at whether or not the narrative of Trump being involved in the Russian interference actually preceded July and wasn't in fact the precipitating trigger for the investigation. He's also looking at the conduct of the investigation. There are some things that were done in the investigation that are not included in Horowitz's report, and he's looking at those things. But also, a few weeks ago, I told him that he should spend just as much attention on the post-election period. And I did that because of some of the stuff that Horowitz has uncovered, which to me is inexplicable.
Such
inexplicable. As? Well, what I said is their case collapsed after the election, and they never told the court, and they kept on getting renewals on these applications. There was documents falsified in order to get these renewals. There was all kinds of withholding of information from the court. And the question really is, what was the agenda after the election that kept them pressing ahead after their case collapsed? This is the President of the United States.
You, of course, went to 3 countries with him. Why did you have to do that? And some people have said, well, this is clearly Bill Barr's in charge of the investigation.
Well, the presentation of that in the media has been silly. The person running the investigation is John Durham.
Again, Barr is very level-headed here, and he says the media's interpretation of that is very silly. Durham's in charge of the investigation in all these other areas. I think Barr needed to be there for a second witness to cover Durham's back.
But this is a very unusual circumstance where we are going to foreign governments and asking them to assist and cooperate, including, some of their sensitive materials and personnel. And a U.S. attorney doesn't show up on the doorstep in some of these countries like London and say, hey, I want to talk to your intelligence people and so forth. All the regularities were followed. I went through my purpose was to introduce Durham to the appropriate people and set up a channel that he could work with these countries. At the request of the country, I went through the ambassadors of each country, and the governments wanted to initially.
Now, see, the media never covers this. This is why the media sucks in this country and is so biased, so ignorant, and so diligent on their own agenda.
Actually talk to me to find out, what is this about? What are the ground rules? Is this going to be a criminal case? Are you going to, do a public report? They wanted to understand the ground rules before they met with Durham, and I met with him, and then I set up appropriate channels. This was perfectly appropriate.
Speaking of whether something is appropriate or not, was it appropriate for John Durham to issue his statement yesterday, given that he's a U.S. attorney with a grand jury and his investigation isn't done yet?
I think it was definitely appropriate because I think it was necessary to avoid public confusion. I think it was sort of being reported by the press that the issue of predication was sort of done and over, even though it was a very limited look at that issue by the IG, given the narrowness of his, of the evidence available to him. And I think it was important for people to understand that Durham's work was not being preempted. And that Durham was doing something different, and he explains what he's doing different, and that there are areas of disagreement. I think it was perfectly appropriate so the public understood the relationship between the two exercises.
So you've outlined.
So this is why Barr is so essential, and Durham. And this guy is stupid. He's got his own agenda. He's just, golly, ignorant as hell on how things really work.
Outlined a number, and so does the Inspector General, of problems with the way the FBI handled this investigation. Are you confident that Chris Wray can fix them? And I ask that in light of the President's tweet today where he says, I don't know what report current director Wray was reading, but it sure wasn't the one given to me. With that kind of attitude, he'll never be able to fix the FBI.
Well, practically speaking, I think Chris has been working hard to address the problems of the past. We've worked well together. The people who were involved in the past are no longer there. He's brought in a new team that I think is a good team. I have confidence in that team. And I think he has set forth a number of specific proposals as to how to address those problems. And I think what the president was getting at, and I feel the same way, is that we can't ignore the abuses of the past and appear to be justifying them or minimizing them. We have to focus on getting it right going forward.
So you have confidence in Chris Wray?
Yes.
Before I go into a couple of other questions, let me just sort of button
There's some concern with that, but we'll find out how this all plays out.
this up. I think a lot of people will hear what you're saying here and think, well, that's just Bill Barr defending Trump. Your concern about the FBI's investigation is what? Civil libertarian?
I think our nation was turned on its head for 3 years. I think based on a completely bogus narrative that was largely fanned and hyped by an irresponsible press. And I think that there were gross abuses of FISA and inexplicable behavior that is intolerable in the FBI. And the Attorney General's primary responsibility is to protect against the abuse of the law enforcement and intelligence apparatus and make sure that it doesn't play an improper role in our political life. That's my responsibility, and I'm going to carry it out.
Now, he's very clear about what his responsibility is. The legal abuse and the surveillance abuse is his primary responsibility. And he's going to make sure that it is not abused in that area, and that my hat's off to him. He knows very clearly what his responsibility is.
A couple of other questions. Were you ever asked by the White House to talk to...
See, and they just go on beyond this. I hate the damn press. Golly, it sucks.
anybody in Ukraine about an investigation of Joe Biden?
No.
Are you concerned that Ukraine has a missing server from the Hillary Clinton emails?
Fortunately, I haven't gotten into the Ukraine thing yet. I don't know. I'm not even sure about the nature of these allegations.
What about the allegation that it was the Ukrainians who meddled in the election, not the Russians? Are you satisfied that's not the case?
I am confident the Russians attempted to interfere in the election. I don't know about the Ukrainians. I haven't even looked into it, frankly.
What was your involvement in the department's decision not to investigate the president's phone call to Ukraine?
Well, we put out a statement that explained the process, which was the criminal division made that decision and in the process consulted with the senior-most career employees who are the experts on campaign finance laws, and that process was supervised by the deputy, but I'm not going to go beyond what we've already said about that process.
Well, were you satisfied that everything that was done that should have been done?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Let me ask about a couple of other questions. Was the shooting attack in Pensacola last Friday a terrorist act?
At this stage, it certainly appears to be, and that's what we're investigating, and the people investigating it are our anti-terrorist investigators and agents. I would say that we appreciate the fact that the kingdom has been cooperative so far, and we hope and expect that that will continue.
Are they allowing, for example, FBI agents to go into Saudi Arabia and question people about this man's background?
I don't want to get into the details of the investigation.
I ask only because in the Khobar Towers, for example,
FBI doesn't really have delegate authority over there. This again, very ignorant and very biased reporting. It sucks. They don't have foreign jurisdiction, just the United States.
Investigation in some of the past investigations where the FBI has wanted to do things in Saudi Arabia, it hasn't gone very smoothly.
As far as I'm aware, right now we are satisfied with the cooperation we're getting. I haven't heard anything otherwise.
You gave a speech last week here in the building, award presentation to some police officers, and you said something that got a lot of attention. You talked about how people applaud when military veterans, they see them in the airport. People come back from combat, they get ticker tape parades. Not so for police. And you said, this is a quote, if communities don't give that support and respect to the police, they might find themselves without the police protection they need. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, that was a somewhat condensed version of a speech I had given to the Fraternal Order of Police in New Orleans. And we're in a crisis right now. It's not something that has been adequately covered by the media. But we're in a full employment economy. And one of the toughest jobs we have in the country is policing, and it's getting tougher and tougher. These are the points I was making, and I said this in that recent, more abbreviated version. And so it's very hard to recruit people these days in this full employment economy.
So he's saying it's very hard to replace and get police departments staffed in this current mindset and economy.
For these tough jobs. That's why virtually every police force in the country is way under strength. They have vacancies. And as the jobs get tougher, we're seeing a very high suicide rate now among police. And I'm saying that
very high suicide rate among police. They need more support from the community, and they're not getting it. It's a very tough job.
we have to focus on this and start valuing the people who serve us as police officers and show them support and respect just the way we do our military forces, or else we're not going to be able to attract people into this profession, and we're not going to end up with police forces. That was my point.
But you're not saying that people shouldn't criticize the police if they think there's misconduct?
No.
How long do you think, just to go back to Durham for a moment,
Golly, stupid. Oh, I hate the press.
how long do you think his investigation is going to take? Do you have any sense of how long he's going to take, and what will we see when he's finished?
These things take time, and I know there's a lot of impatience. People want results immediately, but those are people who don't understand our process. We have to be careful about the way we collect evidence, and we have to make sure that we have enough evidence to justify our actions, and that we're not going to cut corners in that respect.
True statement. True statement. This may take another 3 or 4 years. I wish it was quicker too, but it's not gonna. He says he's not gonna cut corners. It's gonna take time.
There's some people who think this thing is going to drop in a few weeks. That's not the case. I see this perhaps reaching an important watershed, perhaps in the late spring, early summer.
And how will, I mean, obviously he's got a grand jury. If he brings charges, we'd find out about that. But otherwise, will he have a report? Will he just tell you? How does that work?
I haven't discussed that with him yet.
Do you have any goal? Would you like to see him have a report or make some sort of public presentation?
I'm going to largely leave that to him, but I'm also interested in discussing that with him as he gets further along.
So a timeline here is spring to summer. That's an interesting timeline because that's when the Supreme Court is also going to get into some things. So we're going to see this go right into the spring, summer, and fall. Just like I said it would be just before elections. I think this will hit full climax in the later summer, early fall. Mark my words. We're going to leave it here. This is Roger Mark from Village, Montana. Well worth watching this interview by NBC. I regret the reporter's quality. Other than that, what should I expect? Very, very foolish reporting.